campaign and massive amounts of money that are pumped into these hospitals and medical centers by pharmaceutical companies and with research grants. It turns out that when a researcher applies for a grant, and all researchers apply for grants because that's the only way they can stay in their positions, when they apply for a grant from, say, the National Institute of Health, for instance, that money comes in. Half that money goes straight into the hospital. They can use that to pay the janitors. They can use that to pay the rent. They can use that money any way they want to. Then the other half goes to the researcher for actual animal research or non-animal research. But unfortunately, the National Institutes of Health and other research funding organizations tend to lean towards giving more money for animal research because it produces more data and they get more publications. And they're interested in protecting themselves in a legal arena by saying, well, you know, we tested this on rabbits and dogs and cows or anything else they want to test it on, and therefore we shouldn't be held responsible when it turns out to, lo and behold, produce heart attacks in human beings like that drug Vioxx did.
Let me explain something about the City of Hope. It's the golden temple of cancer research. I lost my mother to cancer, my mother's husband, whom I absolutely adored. I lost a lot of good friends to cancer. But what they're doing there, if I took anybody from the public into this facility and you saw what they were doing to these animals, because I was the lay public at one time when I first went into these research facilities, if you looked at it, there is no way in your mind you could justify that and call it science. It's not science, it's insanity.
Ruthless, I think, is the word.
When I interviewed Bill Maher for the TV show Celebrity Justice, I learned he was a free thinker who doesn't have any fear of making controversial remarks. So he takes on issues that other people in the media are afraid to take on. And he has taken on this issue of experimentation going on at Columbia University that he says is a perfect example of unnecessary and hideously cruel animal experimentation.
Some of these experiments are having to do with finding out, you know, how bad nicotine is for you. You know, like we need to do that.
I think beagles are a common choice for animal testing because beagles are generally friendly. They're a small breed. They don't take up a lot of room. And it's really unfortunate because if you think of all the breeds of dogs, who would rather be out running around in the sunshine and sniffing grass and trees and playing than a beagle?
We had bought some ads on K-Rock and, you know, 3 or 4 companies, pharmaceutical companies, had called them and said, these people are terrorists, you have to pull the ads. And they ended up pulling the ads for the show. I never really thought about the whole thing until I've gotten into it and realizing how important money is for everything, for advertisements. And obviously we can't show any of this stuff on TV, you know, because, you know, every other commercial is for fast food or for some kind of, for the meat industry or for some new, you know, anti-allergy pill or fucking Viagra or whatever.
I don't know yet of anyone who's died from PMS. I know some people have had PMS who've killed some people, but that's different. So to me, that's a particularly weak case to be making for the torturing of little creatures.
I'm not an advocate of anything illegal. I can only, as a journalist, look at the social forces that might contribute to this kind of behavior. And I see that when the mainstream media refuses to show the images of what's going on inside laboratories and factory farms, it creates a social condition that could lead some people to extreme behavior.
every year, a score of 1 billion animals die so we can eat their dead bodies, so we can enjoy them jumping through hoops of fire and riding toy bicycles, so we can skin them and wear them, and because our palate is trained to crave their flesh. But all we need to do is be ever so polite and patient and just practice politics. And change will come when that's never happened in any other social justice movement, hands down, in the history of the world.
Throughout our history, there have always been those who have petitioned the government and wrote letters to legislators and politicians. There have even been those who have written bills and had discussions with the leaders of the nations. These tactics alone have never worked. The only time we have seen a social justice movement prevail has been because there was pressure from more radical factions. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of people led by Samuel Adams and Paul Revere disguised themselves as Native Americans and boarded ships containing detained tea. They threw the tea into the harbor in protest against taxation. Adams and Revere were labeled terrorists by some and heroes by others. The suffragettes would chain themselves to railings, setting fire to the contents of mailboxes and smashing windows. The suffragettes evolved into the modern-day women's liberation movement, and is the reason women are now allowed to vote and no longer considered pieces of property. In the history of the world, what all of our social justice movements have in common is that they have faced government and community repression, including arrest, imprisonment, FBI and CIA investigations. They also share the commonality of having different factions within those movements. The most compelling example being the civil rights movement, wherein we had a leader advocating illegal activity in a peaceful manner, including nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. But we also had another leader who advocated violence and absolute abolition at all costs. It was during this passionate time in our history that the President, John F. Kennedy, stated publicly, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." In 1960, Nelson Mandela led an organized guerrilla warfare against the white government in response to a group of peaceful demonstrators being massacred. In 1964, Mandela was convicted of sabotage and sentenced to life in prison. However, he was released in 1990. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. In 1994, Mandela was elected president of South Africa. A man once labeled a terrorist is now considered a freedom fighter.
I recognize that the things that I believe in very likely might take me away from being a father, from being with my son again, and I might have to go back to jail. I might be killed. But that is part of being a warrior.
If breaking the law and going to prison has to be a part of that process, then it's something you have to prepare for. As with all people fighting for a liberation struggle or for social change, you have to accept that it's part of that process, that is our job, that is our task.
I mean, Martin Luther King said all that, that you got to expect it. It's a sign of how effective you're becoming.